Okay, hey, everybody, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. Good to catch up with some people I hadn't seen in a while. My name is Mark Grant, and up until April of last year, I was a CISO at CSX and worked there many years on securing the rail infrastructure. And today we're going to be talking about the critical role that the right type of engagement with suppliers plays in cybersecurity. And Bill and I will be covering that. So Bill, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bill Heinrich. I'm one of the three, I think, that raised our hands earlier about who started their career in the railroad industry. So I spent over 40 years in the railroad industry. So an old railroad guy. I spent it with three railroads: Union Pacific, BNSF Railway, and Amtrak. I was the CISO at BNSF, and then also the CISO at Amtrak. And you heard Jesse talk earlier. I handed the baton off to Jesse when I decided to seek greener pastures in retirement. So that's kind of where I'm at. And we do want to talk about, we heard a lot about partnership here today, and I think Mark and I are going to talk more about partnership and specifically with suppliers. So Mark, I tee off the conversation. You spent time in large railroads, you spent time with small railroads, you're in the shipping container industry. Talk about cybersecurity from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think I was reminded of how important cybersecurity is for railroads in particular, and the transportation sector in general, on a recent road trip I took. And I was in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was driving through Memphis. And of course, my navigation system, I'm not going to say which one I was using, but my navigation system glitched like right when I was in Memphis. And so I don't think it was a cybersecurity attack, but if it was quite advanced, because threw me off track. I ended up kind of in the industrial section of Memphis. And I knew that this was true because the traffic pattern changed significantly. So instead of a lot of cars around me, suddenly I was surrounded by, container trucks with the big 40-foot containers and the 20-foot containers. And it became quite congested. And sure enough, I ended up next to the Memphis intermodal terminal for BNSF. And Bill, maybe you're familiar with that facility, but it's quite a large facility. And it reminded me of all the technology that's applied in a facility like that. I mean, at the gate for checking the truckers in, they've got automation systems to make that flow easily. They have people there with handheld computers that they're using to check that stuff in. The big cranes, you've probably seen them, the wide span cranes. A lot of that stuff is very automated. And I know that from the experience I have in the industry. And then, you've got the tracks, the mainline track comes in, and, on the way side, there's technology deployed. Their technology is abundant in the yard itself with the yard tracks. And then we have the locomotives, of course, which have been referred to at least once today as data centers on wheels. So there's an awful lot of technology that's deployed. And I also remembered my time early in my career when I worked for a container shipping company, and we were putting terminal automation systems in years ago. And one day when it wasn't working well, and again, this wasn't a cyber attack either, but you know how implementation of new systems can go. The New Jersey State Police showed up in the server room and wanted to know when we were going to have the systems back online, because we were backing traffic up onto the New Jersey Turnpike, and it was leading to delays and a lot of congestion. So the reality is, modern railroads our business processes are 95+% reliant on technology, and some are 100%. And, when they don't work, it's a big problem from a business perspective and from a supply chain perspective. And so these things are important. And because of that, businesses are very incented to have a focus on those processes. They need to be able to prevent attacks to the extent possible, but they also need to realize that 100% prevention is likely not attainable. So therefore, they need to be able to detect attacks when they occur at the earliest opportunity. And they need to have a decisive response when that occurs so that, they can minimize the business impact. And so it's why we're here talking about this topic. And it also made me think, Bill, about your experience that you've had both designing and securing critical systems. And how do you think about, Bill, the role that suppliers and supplier engagement plays in that process?
So rails go back a long ways. The rail industry in the United States is 150, 160 years old. You have a lot of applications, a lot of technology out there that rails have built over the years. Some of it still exists. I can speak from experience that there are OT systems out there that are 40 and 50 years old. They're very special purpose things. They do what they do very, very well. But as someone has already mentioned, 40, 50 years ago, cybersecurity was not a consideration. They were put on the network. They do what they do well. But they're very fragile if you try to do something with them, as far as maybe do a network scan on them or whatever. So you have to know where those things are. And do you know where those things are? Number one, you have IT business systems that were out there a long time. I was telling a story last night that I was a programmer at University of Railroad. Somebody reached out to me not too long ago and said, "Hey, this program that you wrote back in the early 80s, I just cracked it open and was going to make some modifications to it. Just thought she'd let you know that it still exists." I can guarantee you when I wrote that program 40 years ago that cybersecurity and security was not a consideration. So things have evolved. There's still, railroads are running on old technology, but they're also running on new technology. They're buying new custom packages. They're working with suppliers, all the enterprise resource management systems. Do you know where those are? Are you involved in the process? Are you talking to those suppliers? Are you involved in the design stages? Those type of things. Mark's already talked about the instrumentation and connectivity of railroad systems and railroad environments. It's technologies everywhere. And Jesse talked earlier about all the different disciplines they have within this the road industry. It's a power company. It's a resource management company as far as law enforcement. We're a transportation company. Technology is involved in all that stuff. Even the police officers are carrying, cameras, and there's technology on the police officers to make sure that just like the municipal police officers have. So there's technology everywhere in every one of our business processes. And then cloud is becoming a more predominant player in the road industry. Some companies have a cloud first mentality. So if you're going to do anything in the railroad industry, you're going to do it in the cloud first. And tell me why the cloud won't work. And so do you understand that? And do you understand the security around those cloud guys? And do you understand how those applications are being instrumented? Tripwire put out a report earlier this year, and you see it up there, is that 2/3 of the supply chain attacks actually started with a failure or exploited trust in the supplier's security. And so how do you handle that? If a supplier has an attack and it affects you, how do you handle that in your environment? And what do you do with that? And do you have things in your system that would help you understand that and better manage that?
Are we talking about, Bill? I mean, are we really talking about supply chain risk management? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, maybe that's what we're talking about. In a nutshell, cybersecurity is all about risk management. We're risk managers. It's a complicated, it's a specialized risk, but it's risk nonetheless, and that's what we do. Cybersecurity, supply chain management risk is just one aspect of the risk that we handle as cybersecurity people. NIST defines the cybersecurity supply chain risk management as the process of identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks associated with IT and OT and service supply chains, basically from initiation of a project or technology to the obsolescence of that project or technology. Your cybersecurity teams need to be involved in the very front, and they got to be involved all the way along, even disposal of those assets, because it's important. Even at the end, you may have stuff that in the obsolescence stage that you need to be aware of. That's where we talk about, it's been mentioned a lot about automated discovery is really important in this because you're not going to know everything in a cybersecurity organization. You're going to find stuff all the time. Do you have technology that will identify what's on the network, what's out there? And if it can find it, can it tell you what it is? I mean, you may see a node out there, but you don't know what it is. You have technology that would specifically tell you what type of technology. Is this a switch system on a railroad, and is it manufactured by XYZ, and is it running this firmware, or is it running this software? Can it tell you that? And then can it fingerprint it for you? Can it tell you exactly the security posture of that device? And by the way, does your software allow you to be able to push that stuff off dynamically? Maybe you need to segment it off dynamically, sandbox it, whatever you need to do to mitigate that risk. So all those types of things you need to worry about with suppliers. And incident response. Do you think about in your incident response systems, is a supplier involved in your incident response plan? If one of these cloud providers has an incident and it impacts you, how do they notify you? Is that even part of a consideration as you do incident response? I know incident response is done very well in the railroads I worked in as far as having plans internally, but do you take into account that the suppliers can also have an incident and you need to handle that? And then what's your engagement with your sourcing and legal organizations? Jesse mentioned it earlier. If you're not putting security provisions, security clauses in contracts with the suppliers, you're missing the boat. You need to have that. You need to have a good T's and C's around how you're going to work with them and being notified. If you have an event and you're hurt by it, what kind of penalties, those types of things. You need to understand that, but also it's about understanding your relationship. You need to build that in those contracts too, to understand how you're going to work from a cybersecurity perspective with those suppliers. Mark, so you've worked with supplier engagement and working with new products and services. What are your thoughts around how you would engage and work with suppliers there?
Well, I think you mentioned a lot of good things, but another aspect that I think about are actually suppliers that bring security solutions against the problem that you need to work with as well. And there are a lot of smart people that work on products and are delivering solutions that work for suppliers. And it also is true, I think, that particularly in the OT environment, there's a lot of similarities in technologies that are employed in different industries. So if, for example, you know how to hack a pipeline or something about hacking an automobile, a lot of times those skills will translate across industries because the underlying technologies are very similar. Railroad may be using the same PLC. Certainly, Linux is ubiquitous in a lot of these control environments. And if you know how to attack a Linux server for a pipeline, you're probably going to have a pretty good shot, at least having a starting point for a railroad. Also though, on the other side, if you're a security professional and you have experience protecting critical infrastructure, those skills translate to a certain extent also. But we've also talked about, but the point is you can't, to deliver these solutions from a security provider perspective, you really can't do that in a vacuum. And the reason why, even though these things are ubiquitous and the skills may translate, there's the business context that we talked about earlier. So you have to understand, and Jesse talked a little bit about it as well, you have to understand how that technology is applied, what are the potential consequences if a specific system is targeted from a business perspective. And that part doesn't translate very well. A railroad, is significantly different than other types of businesses. So I think the things that I've seen work we really have to think about ways to engage security suppliers also in the solutioning process. So a good example would be during penetration testing. I know railroads do an awful lot of penetration testing on their IT systems and also their OT systems. And you have to think of ways, and you have to be careful about it because the information is very sensitive, but you have to think of ways to give some engagement with suppliers who are going to bring solutions to help you protect those systems. You know, you can't expect them to just somehow understand these things and be able to deliver a solution without some level of engagement. And we have to get better at that. The other area I think is around threat intelligence. So we get a lot of indications of bad things that are happening. A lot of that comes from government. A lot of that comes from other railroads as railroad professionals. But there's also a role for suppliers, and particularly I think of suppliers that may have a global footprint, and they may be the first ones to see an attack. And if they're specific to your industry, that's an excellent way to receive a very timely and important threat intelligence on what's going on in your industry. So those are just a couple of ways. And thinking about the future now, as we're kind of talking about how things might evolve, I mean, I don't know, Bill, do you have any sort of, I mean, what do you see? How do you see the supplier relationship? Isn't it amazing how we have slides for the questions exactly? It's a coincidence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, how do you see these things evolving for future concepts?
You talked a little bit about, I mean, partnerships been mentioned a bunch here today. And what does it mean? And within the rail industry, the time we spent there, there's good partnership, at least the class one CISOs and stuff. We work across the industry. That we've done some joint testing on things, joint pen testing. But can you bring your suppliers? Have you brought the suppliers in? Can you bring the suppliers in to do testing? Sit alongside you while you're doing that. And by the way, what a great opportunity to train your security staffs, to bring them along. We did some stuff with CSX, you know, at crossings, and worked with the vendor there and had somebody come in and help us understand what the risks were at the crossing systems there. Been great to have our security staff sit alongside those and learn those. Jesse, you talked about all the, you know, the 30 new people you got in there. What a great opportunity to have them right there in the field or whatever we're doing testing. Will suppliers let you pen test their stuff with them? You know, that's some of the things you need to work out into the agreements with them and the partnership. Product certification, this kind of I don't know, can of worms type thing. But I know I read something last week where the White House is going to start proposing maybe an Energy Star program for cybersecurity, and they're going to start with consumer products. So, what does that mean? You know, are they, you know, what it would take, what kind of requirements or regulations are going to put in there in order that you can put, I've got the cybersecurity seal of approval on my product. And, you know, again, it said they were going to start with consumer products, but, you know, once it starts there, where does it go? And what does it mean? But even in that, I think that even in our, you know, within the industry and with your suppliers, you're going to hold them accountable to a set of requirements. Maybe it's a framework, maybe it's the ISO standards, whatever it is, but understand what those are, what's important to you. When work with those suppliers to make sure that they're also in agreement and working with you to make sure that they have their products meeting what you need them to do. And then, you know, the last thing there I talked about, and I've already talked about, is an enhanced incident response. An incident response per plan that just involves you and your company and doesn't involve your suppliers, especially with the number of suppliers that are especially in the OT space. There are a ton of them out there. And, you know, all the people that provide power or do trackside stuff, on board technologies. Do you have an agreement with them, or do you have a response plan with them and something goes south there, and how are you going to do that, and how are you going to work with them as well as within your organization? So I think those are things that we need to think about as we work forward with suppliers and supplier management.
I totally agree with that. And when I should comment, I see Janet in the audience, and the rail industry, I think, actually has done a very good job in terms of outreach to some of the critical suppliers. And I think you guys are still running, the supplier regular updates and communication with the supplier group for those most critical systems to the way railroads operate. And I think that's a wonderful approach to, I mean, all these things come down to communication and, you know, partnerships, and I think building that level of sort of understanding and trust, and that takes work. And I appreciate the work you guys are doing in that space. So we probably have a few, I don't know, maybe a couple of questions. Anyone have any questions?
Scott.
Well, I can talk about some approaches that I've seen be successful. So, you know, I think it occurs both from a supplier perspective. So I think that's a great idea. That should be included as a best practice in terms of when you engage with the supplier. It's a little bit easier on the IT side because I think the processes are more mature there in terms of getting the right provisions and the right, you know, sort of engagement by the IT and security professionals in those contracts early on. The OT space probably a little bit is lagging, but it's getting there, you know, from what I see. So I think that's a good idea. But even the stuff that you develop in-house, I mean, the railroads use a mix of things that are, you know, purchased and in-house developed. It's a problem even for the in-house stuff because, you know, people will get routines or they'll find things and, you know, include them. And so what I have seen be successful is security testing in the development process and, you know, a set of minimum requirements. And you can get tools a lot of times that will fingerprint those technologies that are being used. And you do it for security reasons. You also do it because you may run into licensing issues and there's a lot of sort of drivers for finding that stuff early. But I think, you know, that, you know, don't wait until the end of your development cycle to start testing some of that stuff. But I agree with suppliers, you just probably handle that from a contractual perspective.
Other questions? All right. Thank you for your time. I don't know. Lunchtime. All right. I guess it's lunchtime.